Manning here. Welcome to Dome Theory 93. Gerald Bourguet is with us to talk Robert Sarver. And there's a big news in the NBA this week. It was broken about a year ago. This investigation by the NBA took about a full calendar year, and the results of it came out this week. Among other things, racist language, sexist language, among numerous notes of a pretty hostile workplace being uncovered by the NBA here. The penalties: a 1-year suspension from the team, a $10 million fine, and Adam Silver had to come out and defend it this week. And I would probably argue his lowest point as commissioner so far was that question and answer session with Howard Beck and others in attendance there at the NBA headquarters, defending his suspension, comparing it pretty weakly, I thought, to the Donald Sterling saga, and how that unfolded, basically saying that the publicly heard statements and backlash that the Clippers and NBA faced compared to, I think what's been more of a mellow response from the NBA public, as well as players and really members of that organization as a whole, have remained pretty quiet throughout this. But that's changing now. I think a lot of people have put those comments under the microscope, and now quite a few prominent figures, players, among others in the NBA community, are coming out pretty staunchly against Sarver, as well as members of his own ownership group there. So Gerald Bourguet covers the Suns. He's been following all of this for well over a year. Where do things stand, you think? He's obviously not going to be around this team for the next year at the very least. But I saw Zach Lowe saying that members of the organization don't think he can come back after that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that I think the dominoes are starting to line up as far as potentially replacing him as owner or ousting him as owner. You look at the player support, it's been, like you said, kind of tepid so far, but LeBron James, one of the most prominent figures in the league, still came out with his 2 tweets condemning it and saying that he felt the league got it wrong. Chris Paul, who's obviously one of the leaders of the Suns and leaders of the league, he came out, did something similar, saying that he felt this kind of atrocious behavior, the league didn't do enough with its sanctions against Sarver in this case. So we've got players that are starting to speak out. Suns Media Day is September 26th. So we're going to hear from all of these guys, and I think we might not hear from them until then. But I am curious to see at this point in time, behind closed doors, are they starting to have conversations? Are they debating amongst themselves or deciding, do we want to take a united front? How are we going to handle these questions? Because we know that they're coming. And that goes for general manager James Jones and Monty Williams as well. They all wield extraordinary power in this instance. And as much as it's unfair to put the onus on the players to be held accountable for another man's actions with all these questions, last year, James Jones had basically come out and said, this is not the Robert Sarver I know, when the ESPN article was about to come out. Monty Williams had said, we don't want to dismiss any of the claims in these interviews or any of the horrific things that they're saying went on. But until the NBA investigation is concluded, we're going to wait to speak on that. We just kind of want to focus on basketball. Well, now we have the findings of the investigation. Now we know what did and didn't happen. It's time to speak up and to own, the culture and the family element that they tout with this organization. Now, if you don't speak out on it, something's wrong. I don't want to hear about culture or family ever again.
Yeah, and they have, I think, well, at this point, far, and as you noted, there could be more to come. But the investigation, and I'm not sure how many people watching read that original ESPN report a year ago by Baxter Holmes, but some staggering stuff in there. It opens with this section about Sarver asking whoever he was with at that point why he can't say the N-word, but Draymond Green can. The report comes out and says that at least in 5 instances, Sarver used a lot of contradictions in there, such as these sort of excuses or benefit of the doubt, whatever you want to call it, saying that there wasn't racial animus to these comments, or in the case of, what really I think came down to sexual harassment and a lot of these different, or at least sex-based discrimination against employees here, saying up to a pregnant woman in the organization that her career is going to be different at this point. A number of other body-related comments here. For some reason, the NBA, and I think we could probably the league defending one of its more powerful members, gave him an excuse, a benefit of the doubt based on sense of humor or the nature of these comments, or in some other parts of the report, he's a model of diversity and he's championed diversity within his organization, and he works with the police on anti-racial bias work and this and that. It just sort of skirts around the actual behavior that paints a different picture of his character. It was a staggering report, really, by the league and how it made excuses for him.
Yeah, that sentence that they found there was no evidence of racial or gender-based animus is insane to me, because it literally goes for 42 pages after that, detailing that exact type of behavior. They basically chalked it up to, like you said, his sense of humor, and tried to paint him as like the NBA's Michael Scott, like, oh, that's just Bobby Boy. That's just the jokes that he makes. He makes everybody uncomfortable. And it's complete BS, because you look at the things that he said, the way that he made people uncomfortable, the way that he wielded that power dynamic that he has over his employees. And yes, you can see a clear pattern where he, is just trying to get a rise out of people. But at the end of the day, this guy was told back in 2004 that him using the N-word, even if he was just repeating what someone else had said, is not okay. And there were multiple instances after that. Among the 5 confirmed, as recently as 2017, there was an instance in 2021 where he talked about, as a kid, how he learned what oral sex was in a team meeting. There was a moment in the report where he was about to enter the shower and told a female employee, "You need to leave. You've never seen anything this big." Like, this is sexual harassment. This is gender-based animus, whether you like it or not. They're trying to say that that's just his sense of humor. And I don't know how you can separate the two. And that's what made Adam Silver's press conference even more infuriating, is because they were basically trying to say, no, we hold everyone to the same standard. It's just the consequences for that behavior is different. Like, Adam Silver literally said the quiet part out loud, that there are different standards for an owner versus an employee that he can hold them to. He also said the quiet part out loud as far as the recording, the fact that there was no audio recording compared to the Donald Sterling situation. And it's like, okay, if they interviewed 320 people and they have all this testimony, but they don't have an audio recording, all of that goes out the window. Like, I know that wasn't his intention, but it was dismissive of a lot of the people that came forward, the people that suffered through this toxic work environment, that broke NDAs to speak with investigators, and some of whom had to go through counseling and therapy after the fact because they were traumatized by having to work in that place for so long. So it really was kind of a sickening way that the NBA decided to go about this, the way that they tried to separate his behavior from the motivations for that behavior and justify it in the end.
Yeah, and that was the quote that stuck out the most to me, and that's really the perfect way to describe it, is saying the quiet part out loud for this whole process here and behavior within organizations and how the league functions. I have to make a decision, he said, and it didn't rise to that. The enacting the measures of taking away an owner's team. Consequences are severe here for Mr. Sarver. Reputationally, it's hard to even make those comparisons. Somebody who commits an inappropriate act in the workplace in somewhat of an anonymous fashion versus what is a huge public issue right now around this person. Really, like, a lot of it just boiled down to it not making much sense here. Like, from a common sense standpoint, right? Because listen, we all understand that there's team ownership rights and a huge process, and really this fight that had to probably dive into to take his team away that Silver, as well as the other owners, probably didn't want to get into here. So I think what he basically was doing throughout this whole press conference was trying to be as transparent as possible, even if what he was saying didn't sound good or frankly wasn't good leadership. I mean, other people said maybe you step down as commissioner in this moment if you're unable to do something about something like this. I don't know what the way would have been to go though. Like, because
Mhm.
listen, a lot of the comments were pretty disgusting by Silver. He even walked back that one about employees versus owners, and
Right.
the action that can be taken
Mhm.
versus someone who does. But at the end of the day, he was the one who went up there and said this didn't rise to that level. The investigation, which as it was some other outside firm, but that investigation made a lot of excuses for Sarver, and even without, and this is the key part to me, much apologetic statements from Sarver or
Mhm. Mhm.
evidence that he's going to try to improve himself through this. Silver said he hopes that he's going to try to, but there really isn't much evidence that Sarver felt like he did something wrong here. And that
Mhm.
to me is kind of my biggest takeaway here is, all right, he's gone for a year. What guarantees when he gets back that this stuff isn't going to continue?
Right. Then that's where the punishment comes in and the way that they've handled this whole situation. Because you look at a $10 million fine, that's about 1% of Sarver's total net worth. You look at the 1 year suspension. Silver said he could have gone above and beyond that 1 year, but thought that that was appropriate. And he has to go through a training course. Like, I'm sorry, but the 60-year-old white millionaire is not suddenly going to decide that he's a different person from one training course and a fine that minimal. He is who he is. He's been this person for most of his whole life. And this type of lenient punishment, which he fought kicking and screaming, by the way, is not going to do anything to change his mind or change his behavior. I believe that people can change, but they have to want to change. And so when someone shows you their whole ass, and in this case, literally shows it to you,
That was
you
one of
need to
the
believe them.
instances.
Yeah, like you need to believe them. So I don't buy it. And you look at the statements that they released back in November when the article was first going to drop, how vehemently they rejected
It's a
the
great
whole
point.
thing. And then they came back and said, you know, I still disagree with some of the particulars after the investigation dropped. Like, this guy doesn't get it. He's not going to get it, and he doesn't want to. And if he does get it, he just doesn't care. So I'm totally selling the idea that anything will change if he returns as Suns owner. But fortunately, there are plenty of people, not just players, but sponsors now, City of Phoenix and minority owner Jam Najafi as well, that are starting to speak out. And I think we could see a snowball effect here pretty soon.
And this seems to be sort of the best case scenario, right? Because all right, sure. They didn't go ahead and start the process of taking his team away. That probably would have been unsuccessful, right? If we're looking
Mhm.
at the legal basis for doing that, and I guess
Mhm.
there's statute of limitations they're getting in the way of individuals going after Harvard, particularly for the harassment here. So legally, and this is what Silver was getting into, was just sort of tone deaf as he was explaining it, is that they probably weren't going to be able to take his team away. And if you look back on it, I think our friends at the Rose Garden Report, they're covering the Trailblazers,
Mhm.
put this well. They didn't take away the Clippers in that Donald Sterling situation. There was a whole,
Right.
and the ESPN did a great podcast series about how he ended up getting ruled mentally incapacitated by his wife. It was just
Mhm.
whole crazy sequence where the wife takes control of the team and sold it for a record amount, and she still has these crazy rates. Whether it's like being the number one fan, having court sides, getting
Mhm.
championship rings if they wait all. So the league had this real like master stroke of PR in how that was addressed because of Silver's tough talk at the podium and the protests and all that different stuff that happened back then. It was really a pretty positive result for the Sterlings, and it probably would have been an even more positive result for Sarver here, even from a vengeance standpoint, if he was going to go at other owners. In this case, it's the money talking. I know this
Mhm.
drives the free speech people crazy sometimes, but that sort of is what talks in this society, at least from a morality standpoint. A lot of people are mad. A lot of people don't like what went on here, and now the sponsors and the money people are sort of moving in accordance with that. As you mentioned, I think PayPal is saying
Mhm.
that they're not going to be back as the team's sponsor on the jersey
Mhm.
if Sarver's back after the season. That's millions and millions, and I'm sure other sponsors will follow suit. The Players Association is now starting to speak out against them, and even Jam Najafi, I think, as you just mentioned there, uh, is coming out and saying that Sarver should step down. So is that where this is headed? Is there just going to be enough pressure on Sarver to where he's going to have so little support if he comes back that he just takes his 35%, cashes in on it, which again is going to be a huge victory for him, but he's gone.
I hope so, and I think so. I don't know if he'll ever go willingly. I think it's going to have to be something that literally forces him to the edge of the cliff before he decides to take the jump off. But it does feel like the stars are kind of aligning in that way because we've got players that are starting to speak up. And like I said, if Devin Booker says something at media day, Mikal Bridges, DA, these are younger guys who typically don't dabble in this type of stuff. But I have to think with Monty, with James Jones, with Chris Paul in those leadership roles, that they will say something. That will make a huge difference. The sponsors, obviously PayPal being kind of the first one to be like, look, we're going to pull out if this guy is back a year from now, which is when their jersey patch deal with the Suns expires. I don't know how much it's worth this year, but it was worth about $3 million last year. So that's a substantial chunk of change for your jersey sponsor. We got kind of a very underwhelming response from Kia. I've reached out to 20 other partners and sponsors of the Suns, still awaiting word, which I get because they're probably looking through their contracts right now, figuring out how, as a company, they're going to attack this. Are they going to take a stand and condemn what's happened, that type of behavior, and pull out? Or are they going to kind of stand with the NBA and say, we're going to just keep our money? We don't really associate with him like that. But that's a big one if the ball continues to roll after what PayPal did to kind of open the floodgates there. And then John Najafi, he said in his statement, I have no interest in being the majority kind of owner of the Suns. This isn't like a hostile takeover situation, but he is the second largest stakeholder in the Suns behind Sarver. So if he's able to rally other minority owners to his cause here, this could really help in terms of getting the requisite support they need within the organization to decide, look, it's not even, unfortunately, this is the state of affairs. You need to prove that he's hurting the money, that he's hitting them where it actually hurts. And if sponsors are pulling out, if the city of Phoenix is conducting their own investigation because they help pay for this arena to try and look for morality clauses or any sort of loophole that they can hold him accountable, like this is the stuff that is going to convince them Sarver is not good for us from a financial standpoint, and that's what we need to act. Unfortunately, it's always the money first with this league, and that's what it's going to take to get rid of him, not any of the other stuff that is reprehensible. That should be enough, but we are starting to see some movement on that front at least.
Yeah, and what does it say about the other owners in this case that they're not able to act here, right? So you need 3/4 of the league to throw a fellow owner out, and that's like, I guess I'm not even going to try to play lawyer here on that and what would play out after that. But does this just come down to other owners being scared that they've done bad things too, or they've maintained hostile workplace? And of course, Dallas has as an investigation show down there, and we've heard other things in other organizations. I guess that's just what it comes down to is that, listen, I think Silver was very realistic about this. We all know white men in leadership positions or groups of friends or whatever it may be are saying things behind the scenes that they don't want to get out, and that maybe they don't even feel in their heart of hearts. Like that seemed to be the driving principle of the investigation, and even Silver's actions afterward is that he said these things, but he didn't really mean them. And this is probably going on in workplaces around the league. But we know it's wrong, especially when from a standpoint of like women in sports, which is where this really seems to hit. Like this wasn't a workplace where women could thrive, clearly. In fact, it's they were being suppressed and held to different expectations. And that really seems to be the single point where Sarver went wrong the most here. And we know that's what women go through in sports more often than not is treatment, language, comments like these, things that just sort of deny their right to be in these spaces. And if that's going on around the league, there's got to be some sort of system to have consequences if that's what's being maintained by any ownership group. Because listen, a lot of people have money. We saw it with the Clippers. Ballmer was ready to take that organization. I don't know what kind of workplace Ballmer's overseeing there, but he's clearly a much, much better owner than Sterling. Like, that goes without
Right.
saying. And he's made the franchise more valuable and the league more valuable. And the benefits of that just roll on and on and on. It almost benefits this league to get rid of some of the bad owners. And this guy clearly is.
Mm-hmm. It's that was probably the most frustrating thing about watching Silver's press conference after the day after getting kind of this very lenient punishment for Sarver is this realization that the NBA touts itself as the most progressive league. But if you were a person of color or if you were a woman in sports watching that press conference and seeing the way that they handled this whole situation, the extent of what they were able to actually punish Sarver for, you have to feel disheartened. You have to feel let down because the NBA basically just told you, yeah, it's bad, but it's not that bad. Like, we're going to tolerate it. We're still going to let him be back in the same building that he owns a year from now. And to be honest, we can't really do that much about it, even if we wanted to. It's that realization that 3/4 of the board of governors would have to vote him out. And you probably wouldn't get that amount, even though these are horrible things that he's done. These are a bunch of other rich dudes who are trying to protect their own and trying to protect themselves. Because, like you said, they don't want their dirty laundry being aired in front of everybody else. We heard about the Mavericks' horrific work environment not long ago, and Mark Cuban came out of that perfectly unscathed because he distanced himself. He had that layer of deniability of distance between what was happening within his own organization. So it's one of those things where they are protecting your own, and you're sitting there listening to this, and it's just daunting because the whole system in the NBA would have to change. Because if the commissioner can't even punish the owners of his league, if he's just a mouthpiece for them, like what can you really do? You can't do anything. He said the quiet part out loud. Like, I can't take his team away from him. He could have banned him like he did with Sterling. He could have suspended him for longer, but he chose not to. So it's one of those things where the commissioner of the league is beholden to these owners. How do we hold these people accountable? How do we hold the rich and powerful of this league accountable? The sad truth of the matter is it's very, very hard to do. And until you hit them where it hurts, their wallet, not a lot is going to change on that front.
Yeah, it's a great point. And who knows, maybe they did see some negative money repercussions coming out of that. Like, that ultimately is where a lot of this comes back to. And we probably were too abrupt in waving the flag for Silver as the best commissioner ever and having this be the progressively. And, they get credit for doing a lot of things that they've done, but who led so much of these efforts, whether it was the bubble or the Clippers protest that almost led to a cancellation of a playoff game back then. It's the players. And that's what's going to have to come down to again here, for better or worse, is the Suns players who have really, I think, done a good job not having this be a distraction over the last 2 seasons, 2 of the best in franchise history out there, not even really be a conversation. That's going to change now. And maybe it's easier to go out there and play and succeed than we think it is, but there's a lot of things revolving around this team heading into the season. The Ayton contract and how that played out, getting bounced as badly as they did in Game 7 against Dallas, and Chris Paul another year older, whatever you want to mention that this team's up against this year. The Clippers are back. There's a million different things. And now this is going to be the theme of media day and the early stages of training camp here is, what do you do about Sarver? And I have a feeling a lot of these guys are just going to look at this and be like, is this really our responsibility? But that's what it comes down to in this league now a lot of the time. And I'm very interested to see. We know where Chris Paul stands on it. He tweeted out that this fell short of what should have been done to Sarver. We'll hear from other players, as you said, once training camp starts. But what can these guys do? Like, are they going to have to threaten to boycott a game, as we've seen over the different years here? Statements probably aren't going to do much. How much even really falls on these guys? It's a tough place for players to be in again and again, having to be the spokespeople for bad leadership above them.
Right. It's like I said, it's an unfair situation that the onus always falls on the players to enact change that the league, as the most progressive league in the world, should be doing itself. But it is, I wouldn't expect a player boycott just knowing these guys, especially because, their championship window is open right now. A lot of these young guys have never really been in a situation like this, and I think that they've distanced themselves from their owner because they're aware of his reputation. Everyone's aware of Robert Sarver's reputation. And it's unfortunate because you hope that they'll at least say something. I'm not expecting them to start saying, we're not going to play until you get rid of Robert Sarver. That would be a huge risk, and it'd be unlike anything we've ever seen in NBA history. Because even the Clippers, they talked about boycotting that game, but they did their own public protests. And that was enough because of all the, vitriol around that video or that audio at the time. There is no kind of smoking gun in this case. Unfortunately, there's no visceral reaction to hearing Donald Sterling say what he said. If they had it on tape, this wouldn't be an issue. Like if they had Robert Sarver doing any of these things on video or on tape, that would be a different story. But unfortunately, that's just not the nature of the reality. So they really do need Devin Booker to say something. They need James Jones and Monty Williams to say something. And if they do, then that gets the ball rolling. That attracts sponsors. That tells them, okay, we need you guys to back us up here. And maybe we do see some meaningful change. But I, for one, would be very shocked if they had something planned like an actual boycott.
He's Gerald Bourguet. You can follow him on Twitter at Gerald, Bourguet, lead Suns writer for Phoenix Sports. They just did an episode before we got on here drafting fruit.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. We needed a little levity after this week, so we do a lot of snake drafts. So we just decided let's draft our favorite fruit today.
So go check that out. We're of course brought to you here on Dome Theory and CLNS Media by Athletic Greens. Someone just DM'd me today saying that they went and ordered it, which is great, and they're wondering where they could get their phenomenal T-shirt from the Garden Report. Here it is right here. We're giving those away if you go and try out the product. And great one. We've loved it for over 2 months here on the Garden Report as well as Dome Theory. athleticgreens.com/garden. It's a powder that you put in your water every morning. It's as easy as that. And you're getting 75 vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, just a little bit of everything you need for your health. On top of that, they're going to give you a year's supply of vitamin D, 5 free travel packs. It tastes great. The reviews are through the roof. Like, I don't even have to say it. You can just go over to wherever they sell it and check the reviews, and they are amazing. People love this stuff. They have cool gear like bottles and container to store it in. Great green theme for you Celtics fans out there. So athleticgreens.com/garden, 1 year supply of vitamin D, 5 free travel packs, and a phenomenal T-shirt when you go and purchase that. Just send your receipt to John_Rosanis on Twitter. Also a big shout out to Com. I'm looking for their banner here. Been with us for a minute as well. Com.com/garden. That's 40% off a premium subscription. Sleep Sounds. Rain. I use it every night. Bedtime stories from LeBron, if that's your thing. They got a little bit of everything over there. And listen, everyone needs a little something different for their mental health. So com.com/garden, 40% off. You get it all, and you're supporting CLNS Media in the Garden Report and Dome Theory. We move on with Gerald Bourguet. I think the Suns are so interesting this year. They're this team that's going to pivot toward maybe competing at a higher level than they did in the postseason last year, although it feels like more people are looking at the situation and saying it's going to trend down. Playoff loss, that horrific. The Ayton contract playing out the way it did after an already easy year from him, where a lot of people are questioning his work ethic and everything else. Chris Paul, another year older here. And Booker, he was in that MVP conversation last year. I'm blown away by the strides he's made since that 70-pointer at the Garden, which I just thought was all empty calories. I think he's a real deal playmaker and one of the best scorers in the league, clearly, at this point. Defensive strides, this team's amazing defensively. The pieces are here. You love this red up and down, but what's harder to gauge is kind of the mindset and temperament of a team, especially after going through something like they did in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, like this would already be an uncomfortable enough media day without all the Robert Sarver stuff, just from an on the court perspective, because you look at their last couple of months and it was the Game 7 embarrassment, the worst playoff loss in franchise history. You look at Monty and DA getting into their little sideline spat. You look into, just an offseason of uncertainty regarding DA and his contract situation, that he had to get an offer sheet from the Pacers, which the Suns then immediately matched. And Jay Crowder, the last couple of weeks, what he's been tweeting and the tweets that he's been liking as far as a return to Miami.
What's that? I didn't.
Oh, so he tweeted a couple of weeks ago about change being inevitable and you need to grow and I'm ready for a change, that type of thing, which could be, maybe he's going into a bench role, or maybe he's just talking about, himself as a person. Jay Crowder is that type of dude, but then
he's changing his diet.
Yeah, exactly. It could just be a diet. Maybe he's going vegan like his buddy Chris Paul, who knows? But then he started liking tweets about, from fans and from a media perspective. Someone had tweeted about, I think it was Ira had tweeted about the Heat possibly looking at Jay Crowder if they don't get PJ Tucker. There was another one from a Mavs fan saying you should come back and that type of thing. So it could just be a guy being nice to his fans because he did play for the Mavs. He did play for the Heat. But it was just interesting because he did delete his Instagram for a little while. He had pinned a comment where a Mavs fan was telling him he should come back to Dallas. So you add all those things up and it's like, okay, is Jay Crowder really happy here? There's just a lot of question marks about what this team is going to look like, because when you coast through the whole season, you win a league best 64 games, you're the title favorite, all this stuff, and you have the good vibes, and then you get smacked in a game 7 at home in the second round when you had title aspirations. Like, yeah, there are going to be questions about what does the locker room look like? What are the vibes like? Are they ready to bounce back, or did something break permanently in that situation? I think a lot of these guys are too young to let that bother them, but Chris Paul is getting older. Like he said, he's running out of opportunities to compete for titles. Jay Crowder, I mean, it would make sense for him to move into a bench role. He's an expiring contract. There were all the Kevin Durant trade rumors over the summer. So there's a lot of potential for change here if the first couple months of the season don't go according to plan.
For sure. And that's going to be a big thing I'm watching with them, and Brooklyn, of course, as well, is how quickly they could both get back to the table there, because this was one of his preferred destinations, Durant, that is. You had Ayton as a possible sign and trade candidate there, though I never thought he made a ton of sense for Brooklyn as a new starting point if they were going to move on. And, he's going into this new contract, Ayton, that I guess they save a year on it after that whole restricted free agency debacle. They end up giving him this max deal anyway for the length of it. But in 2026, a max deal from this current CBA would have been a bargain if he continued to improve under the new CBA that's going to be in effect at that point, new TV deal and all of that. So that didn't make a ton of sense if we're back to Sarver and kind of just his mismanagement of this whole thing here. I don't know where he's trending at this point. I love him. I think he's been a brilliant player on both ends of the floor for this team through the first couple of years here. But I don't know, people just kind of look at him with a side eye, and you have that video game fear about him, which I don't know how much that's about him. But him and the coaches going back and forth, you mentioned that, and a lot of people do kind of see on him to get the best out of him. So how is this going to go after kind of a tense off season where he was probably ready to go to Indiana?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, because literally last year in training camp, he came out and said, like, I don't like doing my big man duties. Like, I don't like being a big man. I feel that I'm more than that. And to that point, the Suns had used him mostly as a rim rolling guy, and he is elite in that function. He's very important to what they do on both ends of the floor. But he wanted to do more. He wanted to be more of a creator, even though that skill set is not really in his bag, and he's a 7-footer. Like, you are a center. I'm sorry to break it to you.
At Arizona, he could run around wherever he went. That was like sophomore year in college, 10 o'clock. I'd throw on the Arizona game and just watch him dribble and destroy everyone. But that's not in the cards. You're right.
Right. And he brings that up all the time. At Arizona, he used to be a 4. He played the power forward spot. And then I think everyone remembers what happened to the U of A in the tournament when they played small ball Buffalo. They got burned for it. Like, he's a center in this league. That's what anybody was going to be paying him a max contract for if they were willing to offer it. And so I think for a lot of last year, Monty Williams was kind of walking a fine line between, okay, you need to do these big man duties that are obviously what you're best at and what make our offense work in the first place. And we're going to give you opportunities to create a little bit as well. It doesn't really show up because 82% of his field goals last year were assisted. So he's a guy that doesn't create a lot of his own offense. It comes from ball movement. It comes from a lot of pick and roll stuff. He's good in the post, but he doesn't have a ton of moves there. It's mostly that jump hook that's lethal of his, and he's got a very good mid-range jumper. But none of that is him really catching the ball from the elbow or from the top of the key, facing up and, making a move. And that's where he's going to have to improve if he wants to have that type of role, if he wants to be a secondary or third creator behind Booker and Chris Paul. And that's something that the Suns need, to be honest. Like, they need him, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson to create a little bit more of their own offense, because come playoff time, we saw it last year. Like, once they hone in on Chris, if he's ineffective, and once they hone in on Devin Booker, they need other options. They need other outlets, guys that don't have to have their offense created for them. And I think that's where DA needs to grow the most, because to this point, a lot of his offense is set up by somebody else.
Yeah, and this team takes a ton of mid-rangers. It's really staggering listening to Lowe and others talk about the stats on this team with how successful they've been the last couple years. Without being a high-level three-point shooting team, without drawing a ton of free throws, just all the different analytic movements they've seen this league go toward to drive their offenses. This team's sort of gone in the other direction. They've done a great job with it. You obviously have two of the elite mid-range guys in the league running the party here, running the show. Cam Johnson, that's a great shooter. You can probably move into the starting lineup to solve a little bit of that. You get Dario Saric back. So, that's a real strong roster player. But Paul another year older, all the different Ayton things you talk about. And then the competition going up in the West here, it's probably going to be tough running here for this team. And it's tough enough where you start to look at really shaking up this core and how much flexibility you ultimately have to do that. That's going to be a question for this team, I think, because I'm not penciling them in at the top of the West again. I think the Warriors are going to really get on the roll again. I love the Clippers. There's a number of teams. Even Minnesota, I think, is going to be amazing next year with Rudy.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because that's been one of the biggest talking points out there as far as the Suns' shot selection and kind of zagging while the rest of the league zigs in terms of where they get their shots from, because this Suns group is one of the best mid-range teams we've ever seen. I think they were second or third in effective field goal percentage last year, but on cleaning the glass, they have a stat called location effective field goal percentage, which basically says if you shoot league average from every spot on the floor, how effective of a scoring team are you going to be? And the Suns were dead last because they took so many shots from the mid-range, which is insane for you to be at the top of one list and at the very bottom of the other. So this is something that they have to change, because they were a top 10 3-point team from an efficiency standpoint. They were 26th in attempts per game. They've got to find a way to take more threes. They've got to find a way to get to the free throw line, because I think they were 29th in free throw rate last year. And they've got to find a way to attack the basket. They need more of a Houston Rockets based shot chart next year.
What's that going to look like? How do they get there?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of it is going to be from DA, Mikal, Cam, getting the ball in their hands and getting to create a little bit more. And I think that will cost you some wins. It'll be experimenting a little bit, but they can't just go through the motions and run the same stuff they did last year, because their pick and roll offense is very nuanced. They have a lot of different curveballs that they can kind of throw at you, but come playoff time, everybody knows everybody's offense. They didn't have a lot of guys that could create their own shot outside of Book, and CP3 was hobbled in that Dallas series, whether you think it's by a quad thing or by COVID or whatever it was. He was not himself. So if that happens again, you need to have other outlets. So that's the biggest thing for me. They've got to spend this season working with different lineups, working with different guys' skill sets, letting them kind of grow their repertoire a little bit.
Who do you think is a favorite in the West going into next year?
Oh, man. I would have said the Suns before this Sarver stuff happened. I think that this is a team that you look at their finals run, and they didn't really they had some adversity, but by the end of it, when they lost to the Bucks, the general feeling was still, this was a hell of a season. Nobody expected us to be in the finals. We're going to build on this momentum. And last year, I think, was the instance where a young team took its licks in the playoffs, because you hear about all these champions and how they had to get over these hurdles. They had to get past certain teams and learn their playoff lessons before they became champions at some point. I think the Mavs series, if the Suns ever do get over that hump, is going to be one of those instances that they point to and be like, okay, we lost the Bucks series, but we just lost to a good team. That Mavs series, we should not have lost that series. Like, we were in the driver's seat. We were the better team. I think they had beaten the Mavs 11 straight times at that point, and they beat themselves. They stopped playing Suns basketball. I really do think that if they get over that hump, they'll look back on that as a learning experience where we're like, okay, we took our licks, but we learned from it. We got better from it. But man, it's tough because this is going to be a huge distraction, all this Sarver stuff now. I think, like you said, the Clippers are going to be very good if Kawhi can stay healthy. I think the Warriors, you can never count them out. But those are probably my three teams at the top. I'd probably just give the edge to the Clippers because they're the deepest team in the NBA by far if they stay healthy. But I'm not going to count the Suns out. I know a lot of people are down on them with the way that series ended, but I do think they'll be better for it.
Everyone seems to think everything's going to be okay in Brooklyn, and we saw what happened yesterday. What percentage chance is there that Durant's on the Suns next year?
I'd say maybe like 20%. Like, I do think if he forces his way out, the Suns are going to be the team that everyone looks at because that's where he wants to go. They have a lot of flexibility to put together salary, and they have all of their picks. Is it better than another team's best offer? Maybe not, but that team's not going to put their best offer if they think Kevin Durant is not going to want to stay there. So I'd put it at about 20. I think he has a lot of leverage as a superstar, but with 4 years on his contract, it's really hard to see a situation where he's able to effectively force his way out. And as much as I think Brooklyn is a combustible group and things will go wrong for them this season, I don't know if it blows up that spectacularly. So I'll say 20%.
And I'll throw it to end this one. We'll talk about this more in the Garden Report when we go live again. But Wick Gross, the owner of the Celtics, came out today in the Boston Globe and said that he feels like the Celtics are being overrated a little bit. I don't know what kind of reverse psychology he's trying to. He said he's not actually trying to lower the expectations in some manipulative way. It's how I feel. Look, I wouldn't pick anyone ahead of us, but I don't include sailing ahead when he talks about the East and some of the competition that's going to be going on out there. And it's kind of weird to read an owner say that, but I think it makes a lot of sense and it's pretty grounded. I think the reality that the Celtics are facing in the East this year, in terms of how thin their margins were on their playoff run, sweep of Brooklyn was played along a pretty thin line. He talked about a lot of this in the piece, and then they lost to the Warriors. And the Celtics, they're still that betting favorite in the NBA to win the championship this season, and I'm probably just a little bit lower on them than that. I love Milwaukee. I love the Clippers. I don't love Brooklyn, but there's a number of teams, even the Warriors. Like, how can you not say the Warriors are favorites? Effectively run what they had last year, save for a few role guys. Do you think Grossbeck's right about this, or do you think the Celtics are going to be that monster we saw winning 22 or 25 last year?
I think they will be a monster, but I do think I like his kind of overall message is underlying, at least, is stay humble. Like, we're not going to get ahead of ourselves here. We don't want the hype that comes with being a young team on the rise that is handed too much too soon by the media or by fans or whatever. Like, I kind of like that he's like, we haven't done it yet. We haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot of competition. You'd rather be kind of that underdog than the team that everyone is picking. Honestly, it makes your job easier because these guys, they are the pettiest people and the most prideful people on the face of the earth. So they hear all that's being said.
Who's he talking to with that statement? That's got to be towards someone, right?
Right, exactly. It's kind of just basically, we're going to stay humble. We're going to keep doing our thing. You guys say whatever you want, but I'm looking at these other teams and kind of deflecting that praise because these guys hear what's said about themselves and what's said about everybody else. So I kind of like that approach.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about it in the opening of the episode, and I'm interested to dig into that one a little bit more, especially toward media day. Like, something has to prompt a comment like that,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm very curious what that was about, but you can read more about that in the Globe. You can read more about the Suns with Gerald Bourguet, who I've been following for a minute for all my information updates. You can read about his take on the Sarver situation at Phoenix Sports. Of course, follow him at Gerald underscore Bourguet, or no underscore there, no underscore.
No underscore. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate you being here. Go check out his new podcast that's out there as well. You can engage, and hopefully we'll talk to you later this season, Gerald. Nice to have you here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bobby.